Hey creative friends, it's Linda here at Lou Creates, and today we're in my pantry. The reason I'm in my pantry is because my friend Linda over at Linda's Pantry thought it'd be a great idea for all of us to share our top 10 canning tips. And I love to share tips, and I probably have way more than 10, so I had to make a list. I literally made a list of top 10 tips. And I tried to make them not common. So stuff that people have asked me in my questions that I've answered and they said, oh, that's cool. And maybe they're just not things that are very common. But the first one, you got to know. If you know me personally, or if you've watched any of my videos or subscribed to my channel, which by the way, if you haven't, please do go down there and click on subscribe, do the little bell. Anyway, you'll know my number one tip is to use approved recipes. And you can get them in lots of great places. Here's a great book. It's the newer one from Ball, and it's really cool because it's got some really new recipes in it, and it has some smaller batch things, so it's always a nice one for folks maybe who are just starting in canning and think they want to try out some cool stuff. The So Easy to Preserve book by the University of Georgia is like a staple for longtime canners. Master food preservers use it like crazy. It's a great one, so if you can get that, I just can't find mine. I think I loaned it, and that's my problem. I loan things and I don't get them back. This one is another great one. It is the Complete Guide to Home Canning. The reason this one's cool is because you can go to the National Center for Home Food Preservation, and I'll leave a link in my description, and you can literally print. This whole book is made in PDF. You can print it out, and you can have your own copy. You can buy it. Our extension office sells it, so if you're interested in that, you can message me, and we can see if you can get one from there. It's just a handy one. And I love this one. It's just really a good book. And it's free, and you can use it right online. So if you're watching this, I know you have you have access to the internet, so you should be able to use that. To me, an approved recipe, I know there's gajillions of people out there that don't use approved recipes, but in my mind, if you're not going to use an approved recipe, think about it. It's kind of like if someone says, hey, come for a ride with me. Let's go cruise around in my car. It doesn't have any brakes, but I've never had a wreck. I just kind of cruise down the side of the road, on the shoulder of the road, and eventually it'll slow down and stop. You would say to yourself, no, you want to go for a ride, we'll take my car, because it has brakes. So your pantry is kind of like a garage you're building, and you want all the cars to have brakes. And if you're not going to put brakes on your food, at least don't take it to a potluck, because all those people are innocent bystanders, and they don't deserve that. So anyway, and if you have questions, most of the time when I see people who have created recipes or they're online going, oh, this is great, and no one's ever died from it, which is handy because you don't get a do-over on dying. You get to do that once and you're done. There are ways to look up recipes. This is kind of tip number 2. So if you have a recipe that you want to know if it's something you can use, if it's approved, you can generally find a recipe nearly identical to the ones that aren't approved, and still go with the approved one, because the one that's not approved may have the wrong, pH, things like that. There's ways to find great recipes that you may not find in these books. The reason I'm telling you that is because these books are made for the general population. There are areas of the country that have specific items. For example, these fiddleheads right here. These are like they're off of ferns, and they're the little fiddleheads, the little curly thing that comes out of ferns. And you can see they're pickled, but they're kind of like little miniature asparagus that are pickled. And I know you can get these, but I couldn't find that recipe in any of these books. So the way you get these recipes, let me take it off of here, is you simply go online. And what you're going to do is in your search bar, this is tip number 2, you're going to type like fiddleheads plus canning plus approved, or plus extension, because most of these are from universities that have extension offices, cooperative extensions, where they have these recipes and they've done research, and these are all approved. Now, when you do look online, you want to always go with the websites, not the ones that end in .com. If you go with the ones that end in edu or org, because ORG is from an organization that does approved research and testing and develops recipes that are approved and safe. EDU will come from universities. Now this one, you get a lot from Clemson University, Oregon State, University of Maine, University of Alaska, University of Washington. And like, I think when I did lingonberries are like a cranberry, but they aren't in any of these books. So lingonberries, I think I got that from, I want to say University of, might have been Alaska. But the fiddleheads, check it out. I went University of Maine. And I got the whole recipe for how to prepare and pickle fiddleheads. Even some recipes for preparing them. But that's not going to be in your regular book. That's going to come from an extension office. So that is tip number 2, how to find recipes for things that maybe aren't as common as they would need to be in those books. 2 tips down. Number 3, this is the coolest tip ever. Oh, here's one, for example. For canning tuna, this is from the University of Oregon. Oregon State University. Ooh, did I say University of Oregon? No, it's Oregon State University. It's for canning tuna. So if you were to type in canning tuna, of course you'd see my video there. But you would also be able to get this recipe by looking to where it said EDU, and you could be able to print this. Okay, tip number 3, canning. A lot of people think it's like an old thing. Our grandmas did it. But you know what? The Oregon State University is so cool. They have actually come up with an app. There's an app for that now. There's an app for canning. And this one is, you just go, the free app, it's called the Canning Time and Checklist app. I love this. It's on my phone. And what's really cool is you can go in there and you'll put like apples. And then it will say whether it's boil water canning or pressure canning. And then it will walk you through how many minutes, and it's basically a timer for each stage of the process. The thing I love about it for the pressure canning process is it literally has the 10 minutes that you vent, and then when you're done with that, it'll set its little alarm off, and you will go, and then you'll put your little weight on, and you'll wait for it to come to pressure, and then you'll hit the button and it will time during that. So it's really a cool app to have, and it's informational too. It's a timer guide. This is what it said. The free app provides abbreviated checklists, which is awesome, a timer guide to users in canning vegetables, fruits, meats, and fish. Intended for people with previous canning experience, the app provides reminders of essential steps in the canning process. So if you've canned before and stuff, and you're just like me, I always have to write down on my whiteboard what time it should be finished. This is just handy. It's just super, super handy. Okay, tip number 3. So tip number 4 is when you're canning and you want to change the jar size. Most often, if you have a recipe, it will say pints or quarts. And sometimes it'll have the time for pints and it'll have a time for quarts. Well, because it's just my husband and I like the in-between size, which is the 1.5 pints. So it's bigger than a pint, smaller than a quart. But how do you know how much time to do this? Because it's never written in a recipe. So what you do is, if you're going to increase the size of your jar, you always want to time it for this amount of the next size up jar. Okay, so if your recipe is for pints and quarts, and you're going to do this 1/2 pint or 1.5 pints, you want to make sure that you do it for the same amount of time as the quart jar. Now, if your recipe says pints and quarts, you never want to go bigger than the jar that it calls for in the recipe. So if your recipe flat out says pints, sometimes they'll say like 1/2 pints and pints. You don't want to do 1.5 pints or quarts. You never go larger than the largest size in the recipe. Consequently, if you have pints and you want to do half size, you can. You can go smaller. You just have to do it for the time of the larger jar. So if you want to do, if the recipe is for quarts and you think, I want to do 1.5 pints, you can. You're just going to have to do it for the next larger size. I hope that made sense. So that's tip number 4. Ooh, I thought I lost my tip card. Okay, tip number 4. All right, we got there. Tip number 5. Can you leave food out of a recipe? Yes, you can. So let's just say I got this. I actually, okay, let's say we do this, and this is a corn relish. Oh my God, this is so good. I think I did a video on this. Go find it. It's so good. So this corn relish, let's say I really, really hate red peppers. I don't want them in there. Leave them out. It's fine. It's not going to change the recipe at all. Some people don't like onions. Leave them out. Doesn't matter. You can leave it out. That's fine. I do succotash, and some of the recipes call for tomatoes in my succotash, and I don't like it. I just like the corn and the lima beans, so I do that. But, next question, can you add food? Not really. If you're doing a boil water canning recipe, and say with this, you don't like red peppers, but you like green, if you look on your recipe, oftentimes, and you can find, it will tell you that you can substitute green peppers for red peppers. You can substitute red onions for green onions. It doesn't matter. You can substitute the different vinegars as long as they're 5%. So things that are equal, you can substitute. But with this recipe, would I cut up a bunch of, say, celery and put in there if it wasn't called for? No, I would not. The reason you don't want to add something is because if you're adding a food, it will change the pH and could potentially make this not a safe recipe. You never want to add things unless the recipe will say you can add. A lot of times vegetable soups will say make a mix of all of these vegetables. You can put them all, you can put some of them, you can put more of one less than the other, but you always want to make sure you stick to the recipe ingredients and only substitute the things that are equal, that says you can substitute. Okay, got that. That stuff's so good. I need to open some. And so, and in recipes too, if you look at a lot of recipes, particularly things like different fruits, like berry, say if you're going to do berry pie filling, it will tell you a bunch of different berries you can use. So say it'll say blackberry and blueberry and cherry. You can do all of one, or you can mix them up. So if you want, I actually did blackberry and blueberry one year for the fair, and I call it bruiseberry because it was black and blue, and I got a ribbon on that. But all of those were in the recipe as ones that could be used for that recipe. So if the things are canned exactly the same, you can mix them up. And then with that, if you are pressure canning something like, say you've got carrots, and I don't know off the top of my head because I try never to memorize. The only thing I have memorized is tuna because it's 100 minutes, unless it's smoked, and then it's 110. But if I do, like, say carrots, and you're thinking, you know, I really would like some carrots and corn. Those are both pressure canned, low acid foods. What you need to do, and I think I did a video on this too about how to figure out how long to do a recipe. So let's pretend carrots take 45 minutes to pressure can and corn takes 90. Well, if you add corn into the carrots, you need to pressure can that mix of vegetables to 90 minutes because that's the longest time of the ingredients in there. Keep in mind, if you do something like that, in 90 minutes time, your carrots are probably going to be mush. So think about really adding that. Okay, if you got questions on that, let me know. Rings for storage. Ha! This is a good one. Do you keep rings on for storage? Well, now we're moving into things which are a preference thing. They're not like safety and all that stuff. In a way they are, but there's people that will store food with their rings, and there's people that will take them off. I take them off. Reason being, I'm going to show you my friend who was a ring store. She gave me this. Oh my God. And I miss her. She passed away, and I just don't want to open this because it was her favorite thing. I don't know. But this is really old too. This is from 2012. Good Lord, I need to. But see the edge of that? You can see how it started to rust. And the stuff that's in here is like sauerkraut. So you can see around the edge it starts to rust. See how that is? Oh, there you go. See how that is? Well, what can happen there then is the ring can actually rust to the jar. It's kind of icky. You don't want that to happen. Also, when you're storing your jars and the ring is on there, I have this really nicely climate controlled. This is actually an old bedroom. It's a bedroom downstairs. It's our middle bedroom. But if you were to store your stuff in like a garage or a shed and the temperature can fluctuate, you can lose a seal. If you've got a faulty seal, it can pop. And then when the temperature goes back, like say it's really hot in the summer and it pops and then it cools off in the winter, it can cool off and suck that lid back down. you will never know because that ring's holding it down and it will make a false seal, and that can make a dangerous item. If you take the ring off to store it, once that pops, it will never be able to solidly stick back down because the ring isn't holding it there. So I don't store things with rings. Even though I'm in here, I put rings on them if I'm going to transport them somewhere. But every year, I go through my pantry, and I guarantee you there will be one or two that have popped just because they've been there, or the seal wasn't amazing or something like that. So I always store them without their rings. And then you say, oh my gosh, I would have so many things on my shelf and it would just take up so much space if I did not stack my jars. I really want to stack my jars. There's a way to stack your jars without, because stacking the jar would put the pressure on the lid and that would create the same problem, see? So you got this weight right there, and if that jar popped, then the lid could go back on it. So you don't want to do that. So I don't know if you guys can see this, but these are amazing. On my shelf, you see these little white racks? Those are the things you can get like at Walmart, different stores, that you put in your cabinets to put your dishes. And you can see some down there. See down there? Those right there? Those are because you can you use them to sort your dishes, and they're kind of like these little coated plastic racks. Well, looky here. A pint jar fits perfectly under there. So you can slide a jar. Look at there. The jars slide right under there. And then I can put another one on top and still not worry about my seals popping. So let me see where we're at. I forgot. Oh my gosh. Okay, so we're on rings for storage. That's number 6. Number 7 was the stacking for storage. So that's just handy. It's really handy. I love it. So I have those over here. They're just handy. And if you're using half pints like you do tuna, this is actually a smaller one. You can get ones that are like really wide. I use this when I do have a case of tuna, and I put this on here and I put the other tuna on top. Just handy. Okay, that's a handy tip. Speaking of storing, we're going to talk about storing your canners. That's kind of important. Canners are really expensive. They can be. I don't have an All-American. I had one. I didn't like it. So I have a couple of really old ones that you guys have seen in my videos. But here we are. Here's my old canner. And what you do when you've got an old canner is when you're done, you wash it really well. Take the gasket out, and very little bit. I actually just take some spray, like oil, spray pan, spray it in the palm of my hand and just kind of work it, this gasket, and then I wrap it in this paper towel, and I put it in here with a bunch of newspaper. It absorbs the smell. So if you've done fish, it will absorb the smell. Part 2 is you make a ring. Make a ring, and that ring you lay around the edge of your canner. And you're thinking, well, why do you do that? Because you don't want to lay the lid on the raw open edge of the canner, because you can nick it and cause a fault. And then you take your lid with the timer or with the pressure gauge, turn it upside down and lay it there. So there you go. So this is protecting the ring of the edge of the canner. It's protecting your gauge and all the stuff that you need. I have my little weight. It goes in there too. So when I pick this guy up to take it, to do something with it, it's all ready to go. And here's another tip. Hang on. I got to put this down. I can't stand it. Okay. When you put the newspaper in there, it helps absorb the odors. But if you really have something that's got a funky smell and you've canned a whole lot and it just smells funky, put a little vinegar on the newspaper. That's kind of like a bonus tip on that. Put a little vinegar on the newspaper and it'll really help with the smell. All right, that's 8. Oh, number 9. This is genius. A lot of people are like, what? I didn't know that. So you know when you use boil water canning and you put your jars, these are all boil water canned, and you put your jar, look at this little jar. I don't need a great big giant canner on that. What if I only have enough berries that I got at the farmer's market for 4 little jars of jam? We'll say 4 little jars of jam. Let's pretend I only have enough berries to do 4 little jars of jam. Do I want to do a whole big canner of water? No. As long as you have a pot that is big enough that when you put your jars in, the water will go to an inch over the top of the jars. Now remember, if it's a pressure canned item, you have to use the right size pressure canner. Don't use a pressure cooker. Cookers are for cooking, canners are for canning. Okay, they've got to have at least a 7-quart, 7 jars in there. So you need to have a pressure canner. Get a Presto, get an All-American, use a pressure canner. But for boil water canning, so much easier. You can do a tiny little pot like this, and you can put your jars in there and you can can them. As long as the water goes at least an inch above the jars, you're fine. But what if you have this little pot and you don't have a rack? You can put lid rings on the bottom, and that makes your little rack. See, look. So if you take this little lid ring out, you want to make sure that it's that down, because if you have it this way, the jar can sit in it. But if you go that way, it'll sit quite nice on that, and it makes a perfect little rack. And you can double layer jars if you have little squatty ones, like you have a bigger pot, and maybe you've got two of these little guys, and you want to stack them. If it's a bigger pot, you would. They probably wouldn't be able to stack in this pot, but you can get some form of, this is an old metal screen that's cut, not for this pot, but you can make something that's small enough to go in there so that you could double stack. So that's kind of a good handy item. And FYI, another bonus tip. If you're pressure canning, you can stack, no problem. And many times I've been there doing tuna, and you put like your 3.5 inches or 3. I always put 3.5 when I'm doing tuna because it goes for 100 minutes. But if you put your water in there and you put your little jars in there and it makes the water rise and your jars are underwater, people freak out. You don't have to. It's fine. Your pressure canned items can be underwater. No worries. In boil water canning, they have to be underwater. Okay, so just remember, if you got 3 inches of water down there, your jars don't have to stick out above the water. That's another bonus tip. And then that's number 9 was the rack. And number 10, no metal objects in your jars. Period. So if I'm going to do these pickles, these pickled peppers, I'm not going to use a fork. I'm not going to use a spoon. I'm not going to use a metal knife. I'm going to use, oh darn it, I forgot to bring it down. I actually got these from Pioneer Woman. They're super cute. They're like little tiny spatulas. You want to use something that's like a plastic knife or a little rubber spatula or something. Why? Because when a knife goes on the inside of the jar here, it can scratch the inside of the jar. You might think, well, it's a big deal. What's a little tiny scratch? You probably won't have this problem if you're only using that jar in boil water canning. But if you're going to happen to use this jar in pressure canning, oftentimes when you open your pressure canner and you see a jar that's broken, oftentimes it's because the jar had a microscopic little crack inside or a little scratch that kind of breaks the integrity of the inside of the glass. So you don't want to use metal. Just don't. You just don't. And that's actually my 10 tips. My next tip is, listen to this. I want you to hear, if you are a ring storer and you want to know if your jar has had a seal fail, I want you to hear. Hear that? That's good. This is actually grape juice. Hear that? Now listen to this. This is one that is failed. Here. So you hear that thump, thump, thump. Ting, ting, ting. There you go. So if you are storing things with your rings, you'll always want to check them before you take them out to eat. Okay, 24 minutes of excitement. It's not bad. I think that's like what? Not too bad. Anyway, if you have any questions, what was that one? I don't know. Oh, okay. I was just making sure I got all my stuff done. All right, you guys, thanks so much for watching. If you have any questions, you can always send me a message. Thank you, Linda, over there at Linda's Pantry, for having these fun little ideas. I love them. I love to do this stuff. And just an FYI, you guys, this weekend, when I was cleaning my pantry out last weekend, I realized I still have 6 number 10 cans of diced tomatoes and a whole bunch of those little Mrs. Wages ketchup. I think I got ketchup, pasta sauce, and something else. And I'm going to can those, so I will do a video on that. Okay? Hey guys, thanks for watching, and I appreciate you subscribing. And down in the comments, I'm going to leave the link to the National Center for Home Food Preservation so you can get that book. And hey, thanks for watching. We'll see you again.